Welcome back to the Sports Philosopher's Rant. I apologize for the delay since my last video. Things have been a little bit crazy around here, understandably. Today we're going to talk a little bit briefly about a historical event in philosophy and then kind of transition into current events. So if you don't like the big words and all that kind of stuff, you might want to skip ahead a few minutes, even though I promise there is a lot of relevancy there. The current situation, apparently YouTube doesn't want us talking about it by name, so we'll just refer to it as the big bad Voldemort. The thing that we're not supposed to talk about is, quite frankly, turning the world upside down right now, and I think it'd be a good thing to put a little bit of this into perspective and to show that this kind of thing that's going on now is not anything new, it's not anything novel really at all, but it's something that kind of happens again and again and again. Some words of wisdom can actually be taken from a movie I saw many years ago. It was in the Karate Kid saga, of all things. Those great movies that were made in the 80s. Karate Kid 3, when Daniel is getting just beat to a pulp in the tournament by Mike Barnes, and he falls down and is about to quit, and then Mr. Miyagi, the wise Mr. Miyagi, runs over to him, yelling at him, Danielson, okay, lose to opponent, not okay, lose to fear. And I think that's some great words of wisdom for the situation we find at hand right now. But even more so than that, a quick study of history will help us very much in putting all of this in its proper context. One thing you realize when you start studying philosophy is that bad philosophy never really goes away. It always comes back in another version or another manifestation, if you want to use that word. And they never go away. And you see the same thing if you study theology, that these heresies and things like that, they never really go away completely. They just change their names around and show up again under new versions. And the one we want to talk about today is the Hegelian Dialectic. Now, what in the world is the Hegelian Dialectic? Well, it can be traced back to the 1800s in Germany by a philosopher, George William Friedrich Hegel. The dialectic is something that just will not die. It comes back in again and again and again, and it was instrumental in almost every single totalitarian regime of the last 200 years, especially with Marx, because Marx was kind of a disciple of Hegel, although not exactly the same. Hegel was an absolute idealist, whereas Marx was an idealist that materialized it and then used his dialectic to inflict all kinds of harm on the modern world. So what is this dialectic all about? Well, first of all, you have to understand that Hegel was an absolute idealist. And when you're studying philosophy, you'll quickly see that there is a swinging pendulum between the one camp, which would be called empiricism. Sometimes it would be called positivism. But this is all the material side of things. It's all about material. It's all about the individual. It's all about existence, not essence. They don't like essence because essence is more of the whole. It's the collective. Now they reduce down to the individual. Idealists do the exact opposite. They emphasize the collective, the absolute, the essence, and they reject the idea of the individual. Because to them, the individual is immaterial, meaning that if, just as an example, if we have this agenda in place and thousands or even millions of people have to be eliminated to make it happen, no worries, because the collective still gets what we want. So the individual is immaterial to these people. What the dialectic is all about, it's a three-step process. It's called the thesis, the antithesis, and the synthesis. What happens is the person who's in charge of this project has an agenda in place, so they put the thesis out there, which will in turn result in an antithesis happening, and then the synthesis, which is the realization of the original agenda in the first place. Here's a very, very easy and simple example of this. For this example, we're going to use as the agenda centralization of power. Okay, so the thesis of this is going to be manufactured terrorist threat. Notice I said manufactured terrorist threat. Okay. The antithesis will be the repressive police state. And then the synthesis will be removal of freedoms, transfer of power from the many to the few. Does this sound like anything that might play into current events for any of you out there? Because to me, this sounds exactly like what's going on right now. Let's take it step by step. The thesis: fear, hysteria, We're all going to die. The end of the world is here. Okay, that's the thesis. Now, what's the antithesis? Stay in place, shelter in place, social distancing. We're all in this together. You notice all of these slogans? There was another party, a political party, that ruled almost 100 years ago in Germany that loved its slogans and things like that. It was called the National Socialist German Workers' Party, and I know that most of you probably know who the leader of this party was. He was democratically elected, by the way, which doesn't speak very highly of people's ability to elect good leaders, but that's another topic for another time. So we have the thesis of the fear, the hysteria, the end of the world, all of that. We have the antithesis being shelter in place, social distancing, we're all going to die, all that kind of stuff. And what is the synthesis of all of this? The absolute destruction of the Bill of Rights, lack of ability to do anything, people cannot go to work, people having to wait on the government to pay them their bills, their rent, their mortgage, whatever it might be. So increased government control, absolute abolition of the Bill of Rights, and lack of personal freedom will be the synthesis of the situation. Let me be very clear, this is not a right or left kind of issue here, because the Hegelian system worked with both the right and the left. With the right, you typically get what's called fascism and things of that nature, like what happened in Italy. The left, you get all kinds of socialism, various communist states and things of that nature, like the Soviet Union and that sort of thing. So this is not an issue of whether you're on the right or on the left, and I mean, I don't care who you vote for or anything like that. My opinion of politicians, of whichever side you're on, is that they all are on the exact same team, and the one person whose team they're not on is yours and mine there. So they all are playing this same kind of game, regardless of whether you're a conservative or a liberal or whatever term you might want to use for that. But how did we get to all of this? I mean, how did things fall apart to the point where they are right now? I mean, just a couple months ago, many of these people that I'm friends with and people I've known a long time were very distrusting, and they were ones that wouldn't believe things at face value. They would not take things, especially said by politicians or the mainstream media, at face value. I mean, my goodness, we have to actually tell you that the government lies to its people. I mean, I know that's just breathtakingly shocking information right there. Or the mainstream media lies? What in the world are we talking about here? I mean, it's almost like taking the movie, that wonderfully crazy line from the movie Scarface, where Tony Montana stands up in a rage and says, "I always tell the truth, even when I lie." And then taking that line and turning it over on its head and saying, these people always lie, even when they tell the truth. And I know that sounds a little counterintuitive at first, but let me explain how that works. As I've said before, when talking about philosophy and theology and things like that, there is a very big difference between fact and truth. You can very easily state a fact and do it in a dishonest way and not be truthful, even though you're saying things that may technically be factual. We see this in statistics all the time. All you have to do is look at a poll or something like that. They are accurately reporting what people respond, but what they don't tell you in the midst of that is what kind of way the questions are being asked to get that response. That's why people don't trust polls anymore, because the polls are usually asked in a skewed way that are going to skew the results. Because if you are even reporting something factual that's based on a lie, it doesn't matter if the fact of it is true, because you're still getting false information and a manipulation. And I would say that every single thing the mainstream media does and tells you is a manipulation. It doesn't matter if they're telling you things that are factually true or not, because they still have an agenda behind it that is not based on you knowing the truth. It is based on an agenda being driven and accepted by the people. That's very, very easy to understand if you spend any time at all watching any mainstream news channel. I don't care whether it's CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, whatever it is, whatever. They all are trying to manipulate you into believing something. And I'm not even talking about the current event. I'm talking about in general. And politicians do this exact same thing. Have you ever wondered why people sometimes use that humorous expression that a politician accidentally told the truth? I mean, come on, people. This is not something new. Politicians always lie, even when they tell the truth, because they are always trying to manipulate. They never, ever are being honest with people, especially not us. They might be honest with the people behind the scenes, the big money people, but they are not being honest to you and me, ever. It just really irritates me personally that people that know better than to fall for things are just eating up this current narrative lock, stock, and barrel. All it is fear-mongering and trying to drive fear and hysteria and isolation. And by the way, isolation from other humans is an extremely dehumanizing thing. If you have a good philosophy of the human person, you would see that every single person out there has dignity and is deserving of respect and to be treated well. And that is the polar opposite of this being taught to isolate and isolate. And I'm not any kind of medical expert by any stretch of the imagination. But when you're trying to make people live in fear of other people for no reason at all, other than because they've been told that they can't be around other people or that other people are going to somehow kill them or make them sick, that is an extremely bad philosophy, whether it's grounded in good medicine or not. And if you start with bad philosophy, you're going to get into bad ways of thinking, and that's going to eventually lead to extremely bad behavior. And that's the point of all of this. Do not let yourself live in fear. Do not let yourself view other people who have done nothing other than exist to make you uneasy, to make you fearful, or to make you mad, which is insane. We're literally to the point now where people see other people outside and in some cases call the police on them. This is America, the land of the supposed free, and we're literally having neighbors get to the point where they're calling the police on other people just for the crime of going outside their house. What kind of screwed up society is this that buys into this kind of fear and hysteria? I don't care what the medical side of all of this is. This is a philosophy issue, and it's creating a horrible society. And if we do not quickly reject this and quickly go back to seeing things as they are, then the future of this country is just a scary world that I frankly don't really want to live in. So hopefully as people realize that the world is not ending, we're not talking about the Black Death or something like that, which wiped out in conservative estimates between 30 and 60% of the population of Europe, whereas if you literally got this, you had above a 50% chance of dying. We're not talking about something like that, or even the Spanish flu, which killed tens of millions of people around the world, or things of that nature. We're talking about something here that even by the most extreme and most sky-screaming hysteria-driven reports are constituting something around, 1%, if that? I mean, that's an extremely worst-case scenario type of thing. And I'm not trying to downplay anybody who dies. Every death is a tragedy, even whether it's of old age, whether it's someone who dies in war, whether it's somebody who dies of the flu, or whatever it is. All death is a tragedy. But we do not need to live in fear of other people and dehumanize other people like this. Even they didn't do it over the plague. And let me take just 1 minute here to talk about the church side of all of this. The churches did not shut down during the Black Death, during the plague, during the Spanish flu, which all killed tens of millions of people. Thousands of priests died giving the sacraments during the Black Death. And for something like this, we are basically shutting people off from the sacraments? What a twisted and scary world we live in. And we wonder why people are going crazy. They don't have access to the basics that they always have access to, the sacraments. You're cutting people off from the sacraments, and then you wonder why they're going crazy. End the shutdown. Let people live if they choose to by living as they normally would, and stop the culture of fear and hysteria. That's all I've got for you today. Thank you for listening always.